Okay, so I've got this little example that we'll work through where we can identify the profit maximizing quantity and price for a monopolist. And I'll kind of, it's not a perfect example for these perfectly competitive markets, but we'll kind of talk about some concepts related to them as well. So I've got two sheets, one that's kind of filled out. I've also got one that we'll build together. Um, and this will be helpful for the quiz this week, but it'll also be helpful to learn some of these Excel skills for other classes. So if I've got my price and quantity combinations, I essentially have my demand curve. Now I'm also giving you the costs at each of these quantities. So we'll start to work out how to identify the equilibrium quantity and price for monopolists. That's where we'll start. Well, we know that we're going to make that decision based off where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So we can find marginal costs, right, to start out. Those are simply going to be the change in my total cost divided by a change in quantity. So the change in my total cost here, if you ever want to do any math in Excel, instead of writing out the numbers, you can put this equal sign. And what I could do is say, okay, take that cost of 200, subtract the cost from the quantity before of 0, divide it by the change in quantity, which I was going from 8 to 0. That'll do math for me, and I can find the marginal cost is 25. Now, instead of using numbers, the real power of Excel is that we can use cell references. So if I want to kind of use that value of 200, instead of typing it in, I can just click on the cell that it's in. So I'm going to take that total cost of 200. And so what that tells Excel is take the value that's in column E, row 3. Okay. So it's going to take that value, subtract from it the total cost of the quantity before it, which is in cell E2. So that's the change in my total cost divided by, well, what's the change in quantity? I'm now at a quantity of 8 minus the old quantity of 0. So this will do the exact same thing as if I entered those numbers in there. It's just going to take the numbers that are in those cells. Sure enough, I still get 25. Now, why is this preferred? Well, if I copy this down, if I go down one row, it'll update all these cell references to go down by one row. Why is that helpful? So if I just copy this down, notice E3, E2, B3, B2 become E4, E3, B4, B3. Well, that's what I wanted. When I wanted to find the marginal cost of the 16th unit, I want to take the total costs of the 16th unit minus the total cost of the quantity before it. So the total cost of the quantity of 8, and then divide it by that change in quantity going from 16 to 8. So there I don't have to type it all out again. I can just copy it down. Now I can drag this down and copy it. Or if I hover my mouse over this little like green box and it becomes a black plus sign, if I double left click, it'll copy that down to the very last row that I have data in. So now I've very quickly calculated my marginal cost at every single quantity. Okay. So the next thing we need is, where does marginal revenue equal marginal cost? Well, it's going to be a very similar equation. I'm going to look for the difference between my total revenue. Oh, I haven't calculated total revenue yet. So how would I find total revenue? I actually kind of already had it in this cell up here. Now it's kind of easy to see when I'm selling nothing, my total revenue is nothing. But what's an equation I can use to do that? Well, I'm really taking the quantity I'm selling times the price I'm charging. So once again, just if I'm typing this in here, take the price I'm charging, multiply that by the quantity I'm selling. Hit enter, tells me 0. If I then copy this down, double left click, it's updated all of these so that at every quantity, it's taking the quantity I'm selling times the price that I would have to be charging to sell that quantity. Okay. So I now got my total revenue. Okay. I now want to find marginal revenue. It's very similar to marginal costs. We're just going to take the change in total revenue. So total revenue at a quantity of 8 minus total revenue at a quantity before that of 0, and divide that by, well, what's the quantity I'm currently selling minus what was the old quantity, right? So very similar. It's just we're now looking at the change in total revenue divided by a change in cost. So it saves us a lot of time. We don't have to do this by hand for every single one of these quantities. So I hit enter. I've got my marginal revenue. Once again, I can double left click. It does that for every single quantity and updates those cell references. So I've just saved myself a lot of time. Okay. Now, before we identify the profit maximizing quantity, I wanted to point out a few things, which are, what's the slope of my demand curve here? So I'm going to widen this cell a little bit just to make this look a little nicer. So how would I find the slope of my demand curve? Well, it's going to be the change in the Y, so change in price. So my price is going down by 4 every time quantity goes up by 8. So the slope of my demand curve is negative 0.5. We know that from what we talked about in class, the slope of my marginal revenue should be twice as steep, so it should be negative 1. So if I think about how would I find that? Well, it's the change in not price, but the change in marginal revenue. Looks like marginal revenue is going down by 8 every time quantity goes up by 8. Sure enough, I've got my marginal revenue curve is twice as steep. Okay. So from there, how can I figure out where does this marginal revenue equal marginal cost? Well, if I just eyeball it, this quantity, marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, so I'll produce 8 units. At 16 units, marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, so I'll produce 16, et cetera, et cetera. Still greater than my marginal cost here, so I'll produce 56. But at 64 units, my marginal revenue is now below my marginal cost. I won't produce up to that point. So what's a way I could do this in Excel? So I'll introduce the idea of an if statement. So this is going to allow me to identify what quantities am I going to choose to produce. So in an if statement in Excel, you start out with an equal sign, just like you would to do math. But you say, use this statement, this built-in function if. I want to test to see if something is true. If it is, I'm going to put a value in this cell. If it's false, I'm going to put a different value. So I'm just going to use ones and zeros just to kind of identify where that, what quantities the marginal revenue is greater than or equal to marginal cost. So I'm going to say, okay, at this quantity, if my marginal revenue at 8 is greater than my marginal cost at 8, comma, if that's true, I'm going to put a 1. That kind of says like, yes, I should be producing that quantity. If it's not, I'm going to put a 0. That says, no, I shouldn't be. So notice here, it identifies, okay, the marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. If I then copy this down, every time marginal revenue is greater than or equal to marginal cost, it puts a 1. Every time my marginal revenue is below my marginal cost, it's putting a 0. So I can kind of see, where do I stop? The last quantity where marginal revenue is greater than my marginal cost, my profit maximizing quantity would be 56. Okay. From there, what would the corresponding price be that the monopolist charges? Well, we would go up to the demand curve. Well, this price quantity combination is just my demand curve, so the price would be 52. Okay. All right. So that's how the monopolist would find the profit maximizing quantity and price. Now, from here, we can do a little bit more work, which is, okay, what is the actual value of profits? Okay. So, excuse me. We've got a couple different ways we could calculate profits. So the first is going to be, we can simply take my total revenues and subtract my total costs. All right, that's an easy way of finding profits. So if I do that and I can eyeball it, I'm like, okay, looks like this is the highest value. Sure enough, it's at a quantity of 56. That's where profits were maximized. Now, we also had another equation, which is, oops, profits are going to be equal to the quantity we sell times the difference between price and average total costs. So what do I not have? Average total cost, but I can find that pretty easily, right? Average total cost at any quantity is just the total costs divided by the quantity, right? So I'm going to hit enter here. Gives me my average total cost at that quantity of 8. I can then copy that down. I've now got my average total cost at every point. Okay. So I kind of allude to something here, and it's just using some other functions. If I'm thinking about a monopolist or a perfectly competitive firm, where would the break-even price be? Well, that's going to be anytime I'm above that minimum point of my average total cost curve. So I'm going to try to find that minimum point. And then we select the values or the range of data we want to find the minimum of. So here, this is going to say find the minimum of all these average total costs. I could eyeball it, but this lets me know it's right here at 18.2. Okay. So if I've got a price that's above that minimum point for the monopolist, we know the monopolist is going to have positive profits. And we'll talk a little more about a perfectly competitive market here in a second. Okay. All right. So a little bit of an aside there, but let's go back to thinking about the monopolist. How could we also calculate their profits, not just total revenue minus total cost, but we can do the quantity they're selling multiplied by the difference between the price at that quantity or needed to sell that quantity minus, where's it at? There we are, my average total cost. This should give me the exact same values I found when I took total revenue minus total costs. Sure enough, at least for here, it's the same. Oh, a little bit too far. It's the same for every single value. So we can see the profits are maximized at that quantity of 56. So everything, hopefully, is going to line up with what we've been talking about in class. So far, so good. Okay. Now, if you calculated profits, another way of identifying the profit maximizing quantity is just where is it at its highest point? So I'm going to show you some other things in Excel that you could do. So this maximum profit, I'm just going to identify after I've calculated profits, what the maximum value is instead of eyeballing it. So, you can imagine if I had like 100 columns here, I don't want to have to, or sorry, 100 rows, I don't want to have to hunt through that whole column. So I can use this, just like I had the min function, I can use the max function, select my profits here, and it'll return to me what that maximum value is. So I've got 1792. Sure enough, that's where my profits were at their highest point. I could then do another column and say, okay, if the profits at this quantity are equal to the maximum profits, well, then I want to identify that as a 1. That's where the quantity where profits should be maximized. Every other quantity, they won't be maximized there. I want to put a 0. So I'm just using an if statement again to check to see if this is true. If the profits at that quantity are equal to the maximum profit value, put a 1 that identifies that as the profit maximizing quantity, 0 if not. Okay. Now, I can also do things like, oops, put in words here if it's true, right? So I'll start out with the ones and zeros, and then I'll kind of change this to kind of show you. So if I copy this down, oh wait, everything's 0. Well, we have an issue. When we copy this down, remember, it updates cell references. So it's going to take the profits and it's going to look at the profits of the next quantity, but it's also going to update that maximum profit. Oh, there's nothing in here. I don't want to copy down that value the whole way. So what I can do is say, look, when I copy this statement down, I want the profits to keep updating to the profit at the new quantity. I don't want that maximum profit value to change. So we have something in Excel we call freezing cell references. If I put $signs around that row and column heading, it'll freeze my cell reference. Excuse me. So now when I copy this down, I'll just do one here to show you. It updates the profits, but it's not updating that maximum profit value. So I'm going to double left click. Sure enough, now this identifies, oh yeah, this is the quantity where that profit level is equal to the maximum value. Okay. And there's other ways of doing this, but this was just a way of me of showing you the maximum function, the if function. I could also go up here, like I said, instead of a 1, put the word profit max. So anytime you want to use text, we got to put it in quotation marks. Okay, instead of a 1, now I've got this word. Okay, so that's kind of cool. All right, I shouldn't say cool. It's kind of it's kind of helpful. Okay, so we now have identified the profit maximizing quantity and price for the monopolist. Okay. So I could stop the video here. I called this monopoly example, but we'll kind of compare this to a perfectly competitive market. Okay. If we had a perfectly competitive market, where is the equilibrium going to be? So it won't be where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. It's going to be where our supply curve, represented by marginal cost, hits the demand curve. Okay. So what we're really looking for there is at what point, and here I don't think in this example there's not an exact equal point. I probably should have made the numbers so that there would be, but we can get really close. We can kind of identify the last quantity where the price would be above the marginal cost, right? So I can say, okay, let's identify where the last price is greater than or equal to the marginal cost, right? Now for this first one, I probably should have started down because we don't have, sorry, I meant to start in this cell because we don't have any marginal cost when we're producing nothing. So we're going to say, take that price if it's greater than or equal to the marginal cost, comma, put a 1. If not, put a 0. What did I do? Oh, what did I forget? I forgot my if. So if this is true, sorry, if that price is greater than my marginal cost, comma 1, comma 0. So this is going to let me see, okay, what's the last quantity a perfectly competitive market would produce given this cost structure? Looks like it would be at a quantity of 72, and the corresponding price would be 44. Well, what should be true about a perfectly competitive market relative to a monopoly? The quantity's higher, price is lower. Okay. All right. Now, this is an interesting example where, okay, this is the last quantity that should be produced. I could find what my profits are, right? Well, here, I'll just do it this way. Just to make it a little bit, oh, can I get this all in one? We don't have to see this, so I'll make this column a little bit smaller so we can get this all in one on the screen here. So we said earlier that break-even price is 18.2. Well, the price in both markets is well above that. So we should have positive profits. Well, we definitely have positive profits with the monopolist. What would my perfectly competitive profits be? Well, here, I don't just have one firm, right? So I would have many firms. So the quantity each one's selling wouldn't technically be 72. So it's a little bit harder for me to calculate what my profit level will be. However, I know that because that price is above the break-even price, what would currently be existing positive profits. So is this really in the long run, even though we have zero fixed cost, they haven't reached the long run equilibrium because at the current price, are we at the minimum point of the average total cost curve? No, right? The minimum point of the average total cost curve would be 18.2. So what's going to happen? Firms will start entering this market. The quantity will increase until the price gets driven down to being at that minimum point of the average total cost curve. Okay. So I don't know, just kind of a quick little example. It was more so to focus on kind of the monopoly since that's what we're covering this week. But I figure I'd kind of mention some of these things with perfectly competitive markets as well. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully it gives you a couple little tips and tricks with Excel as well. And I'll end the video there.